Pauline Hanson's never formed any policy. I fairly soon found out that she was extraordinarily difficult to deal with, not essentially very bright, unable to take on any kind of new idea or expand her view of things.
This time on New Holland Publishers Open Authors, David Oldfield and his autobiography, Before You Judge Me, Being David. David spent his childhood on the northern beaches of Sydney around Manly. Locally, he became active in politics as an alderman on Manly Council. Then, as a Liberal, he worked for Tony Abbott, who was the local member, before in the space of just a few days, he left the Liberals to work for Pauline Hanson and to form One Nation. Since politics, he's been a talk radio host, appeared in numerous reality TV shows, and importantly to him, he became a father. Throughout his public life, wherever David Oldfield has gone, controversy has followed. However, David Oldfield believes there's another side to him that most people aren't aware of, a very different David, hence the name of the book, Before You Judge Me, Being David. Well, first up, I'll start, David, with the name of the book, Before You Judge Me. So how much do you think people know the real David Oldfield?
I'd say not at all, and I think in many respects that's what it's about. But, the book is full of so much information also politically and socially in Australia.
It takes a while before you even get to politics, which I guess in the book reflects your real life. And that's one of the things I learned about the book, that there's a lot of David Oldfield before you decide to be a Manly councillor.
Oh, indeed, yes. I grew up, on that beachside suburb of Manly, and, I was in the water before you can walk, and very soon I was skin diving and then scuba diving, and of course, played rugby locally as well, and, had a very active youth, we might say, and got into a lot of trouble.
You get some political families where, the next generation's part of Young Liberal or Young Labor or whatever the case may be. Were you political at all, or your family political at all?
My uncle, strangely enough, was a Member of Parliament in Western Australia, and probably is the only Member of Parliament, I think, in Australia's history who was Liberal, Labor and an independent as a sitting MP during the course of his career, which is a story in itself. But I wasn't particularly political. My father had been approached by the Liberal Party to join and run for Parliament, but his brother, who was already an MP, advised him against it and told him that politics was such a grubby, dirty, horrible business he should never get involved, and my father took his advice.
One of the things I also found interesting about the book is I already knew that you were a great animal lover, and yet you used to go shooting when you were a kid.
I had a big turnaround. I wasn't an animal lover as such. I was a bit of a shooting nut, which I'm now not proud of at all, would be an understatement. These days, and for many, many years now, I've spent quite a lot of time rescuing every conceivable animal I could. And of course, I have lots and lots of, I don't even like to call them pets, but animal friends around the house.
Even a little horse?
We do. We have a little horse, and sometimes I get a little horse. We have a little horse, a miniature Shetland pony, and a real miniature too. He's like the size of a really big dog. And then we have 3 full-grown horses as well, and a couple of Jack Russells, one of whom has cancer and just lost a leg, which is all a bit sad, but she's doing well, and a parrot and a couple of snakes, and we've got a real menagerie.
Now, you were a professional diver for quite a long time, including a diving champion. And that was, I guess, in a way, the segue into politics.
It was indeed, yes. Look, I was running my local business there. I was a fairly naive 20-something, running a business and teaching people to dive and doing a whole range of things connected to that. And the local council moved in on the notion of stopping people from scuba diving off the beaches of Manly. Well, to me, who was very naive politically at the time, this was an abomination. So I set out to stop it.
You also, before we just get more into the politics, in the book claim you were a shy young bloke.
I really was. And look, I also say in the book that that shy guy is still in me. It still carries over. It's probably impossible for people to think that now. But, bottom line is I am, fundamentally relatively shy.
You also deal with, there's a lot you deal with, so I better stop using that term or we'll be here all day. But that eternal debate, you use different words, I think, but the nature or nurture. And when you're talking about whether you're shy or, the influences that made you who you are, do you think it is the way we're genetically born, or is it the way that we're influenced by our environment?
Look, there's obviously some genetics involved, but I think it is primarily environment. And I see in my youngest son is so much like me as a child, which causes me to worry for him substantially. But fortunately, because I know what I've been like and what I was like myself, I'm trying to help him avoid as much of the trouble as possible.
Well, there's been some trouble, hasn't there? politics. So you were a independent, I guess, initially at Manly, weren't you? When did you come involved in the Liberal Party?
I was actually involved in the Liberal Party before I stood for council in Manly, but I stood as an independent because apart from the fact that that's what I wanted to do at that time, Manly Council or the local Liberal Party in Manly didn't endorse candidature for the local council at that time. So both times I was elected to council, I was actually independent.
That's interesting. I had a conversation not that long ago on radio with Philip Ruddock, who, as we know, is now the mayor for the Hornsby area, and he has to be a Liberal because that's just ingrained and everyone knows that's what he is. But he's firmly of the belief that really party politics shouldn't be in councils. Do you think they should or shouldn't?
I think Philip's right. I think it's absolutely right. And that was certainly the way it was viewed around Manly. But the other thing which is important with that is that often in local areas, the party is of the view that having Liberal or having Labor endorsed councillors on a council potentially causes problems for state and federal elections because you've got all of these people who suddenly are apparently representing the party and they can get involved in dodgy deals and graft and corruption and development applications that shouldn't go through, and it besmirches the party. But quite frankly, I don't know whether you could besmirch politics any more these days than it already has been.
Well, getting off the topic a bit about your book, but you also get that situation where people with a political ambition start going on about foreign affairs or whatever when they should be talking about the local garbage.
They do, and we had that even when I was in local council in the 90s. We would have people who effectively, didn't really run for council to fix the roads and fix the rates and the rubbish and all of the things which was the appropriate jurisdiction of council, but they were more involved in state and federal issues, and they were trying to get the council to do things that, in fact, the federal government was doing. And I think that's one of the things that's important about the tiers of government, that people understand that when you stand in a certain tier, you've got to act within that jurisdiction and follow those rules and push those matters.
So you went on to become a Liberal candidate for the state seat in the Manly area. And, well, that's obviously not a very pleasant experience from the way you wrote about it in the book.
Once again, I was still fairly naive at the time. I was in my 30s and I came out of my business and I managed to stop the council when it came to, stopping scuba diving and those sorts of things. But yes, the next progression seemed naturally for me to stand for Parliament. I was already in the Liberal Party. I was fortunate to be selected as the candidate, but I was ultimately undone by the party itself, which is, was a crazy kind of story.
What's your view now of party politics or political parties? You've been a Liberal, a member of the Liberal Party. Obviously, One Nation is what people associate with you. I guess the first thing that would come to mind. You ended up being an independent in the state parliament. So what do you think of the party political process?
I think sadly we're stuck with parties because if we don't have parties, we have, if you picture the federal parliament with 150 independents, what would they get done? Ultimately, they would form blocks to get things done, and those blocks would merely be parties by other means. Yeah. So we're kind of stuck with parties in the sense that there has to be coalitions of people to actually make things move along. So it's a sad fact that we're stuck with them. I hate them. I really do. I hate the whole notion of party politics, but there seems to be no realistic alternative.
You went on to work for Tony Abbott. And this is going to be one of the chapters in the book I think is going to get a lot of publicity because then you left Tony Abbott literally on a Friday. On a Monday, you're working for Pauline Hanson.
Yeah, the chapter's actually called Leaving Tony. So it's all about, and it's the first time that the real story of how all that took place has actually been put down on paper. I mean, I've heard how it's happened from so many places, written by people who weren't there, so how would they have any idea? But it's the first time I've actually put pen to paper and explained fully, blow by blow, how it all came about and how it was that I could be Tony Abbott's private secretary on one day and then 3 days later be Pauline Hanson's principal advisor.
Well, part of your explanation of that gets into loyalty to political parties. Because obviously there'll be still people, particularly with Liberal members or following the Liberal Party, who would say that you were a traitor. You walked out on the Liberal Party, you joined One Nation, supported Pauline Hanson. That makes you a traitor. You don't see political loyalty in those terms, though, do you?
No, I don't, because I see your first loyalty always being, well, quite frankly, you'd have to say to your family. But when it comes to politics and society, your first loyalty must surely be to your country. And for me, I joined the Liberal Party originally in 1988 and did so, no, it was 1986 actually, and did so off the basis of, I thought the Liberal Party most represented what I believed and what my family believed at the time. But it was what we believed about what should be done for Australia. Australia. So in many respects, party membership is a means to what it is that you want to be the ends. So for me, yeah, I worked for the Liberal Party. I was endorsed by the Liberal Party, but it was because I believed in the Liberal Party and what it would do for Australia. When you find yourself in a situation where you no longer believe the group you're with is acting in the best interests of what you want done, that's not disloyalty. That's moving on to do what you believe should be done and what should be done best.
Issues like immigration were core to that?
They were, absolutely. Immigration, multiculturalism, a whole range of things in our society, which I think that were not being covered in a fashion that I understood they would be. And certainly, you finish up with policy being watered down so as to appease people who are never going to vote for you. I mean, that's the one thing I really find abominable in politics, that so many politicians attempt to appease people who will never, ever, ever in there, as long as they're standing upright, will never vote for you. And those are not people you should be trying to appease.
Those who follow politics closely will know this, but I think a lot of people, it may have distorted, have a distorted perspective and history, is to do with Pauline Hanson's election and the formation of One Nation, because they're not happening at exactly the same time. So Pauline Hanson's in Parliament. She's delivered her maiden speech. That was the night you met her.
I did. I met her at a hotel, well, actually like a nightclub type place. It was a nice sort of place. That was called the Grange in Canberra, and it was a bit of a local watering hole, if we put it that way. And I met her through means of the fact she was being essentially verbally assaulted and almost physically assaulted by someone that I knew, and I pulled them away so that they would not continue it. I mean, it had nothing really so much to do with Pauline Hanson. It had everything to do with my belief that that was an entirely inappropriate situation. I mean, you just don't start verbally bashing someone, especially a man doing that to a woman, anywhere, let alone a public place.
So how did you end up supporting Pauline Hanson and being key to the formation of One Nation? Well,
I'd seen the maiden speech, or a lot of it, that day when it had been done, because I was working in Parliament House at the time. Yeah. And I kind of agreed. I thought a lot of it was not necessarily delivered all that well, and some of it was, a bit shabby perhaps, but there were some notions in there that to me made fundamental sense. And so it was just a natural thing that once I'd met Pauline, we started talking. She was very naive. I was able to clue her up on a bunch of things. And one of the first things that I told her was that if she seriously wanted to make change, she had to form a party. And so that became my job.
You take claim for a lot of the policies of that party over Pauline Hanson's formation of policy.
Pauline Hanson's never formed any policies. I mean, she has no idea of how anything is costed or put together in any sense. And I do explain that also in the book.
You're not glowing at Pauline. Let's be upfront about that.
Oh, absolutely. There's nothing glowing to say about Pauline. And if you read the book, you'll find out blow by blow, pragmatically and realistically.
Did you think that at the time?
No. Well, when I first met Pauline, I thought that she was largely a naive, well-meaning person. But I fairly soon found out that she was extraordinarily difficult to deal with, not essentially very bright, unable to take on any kind of new idea or expand her view of things. She was the worst possible combination of being stubborn and nasty and really filled with a lot of anxiety and a very angry person. And none of those things fit well together in making stuff happen.
And yet, when you had those tours in the early days, the town hall meetings, if you want to put it that way, sometimes getting a couple of thousand people, obviously people were endeared to her.
They were, and I explain also that in the book, in the sense that people don't seem to quite get that what they're hearing and what they initially heard Pauline say, it wasn't from Pauline. She was just saying it. She may as well have been an actor in a movie, uttering the lines that have been scripted by somebody else behind the scenes, and quite frankly, never really learning to deliver those lines particularly well. But I outline in the book clearly that essentially every policy platform or every principle and everything that's ever been uttered by Pauline Hanson was written by somebody else. So what is it that people favour? Is it Pauline or is it the ideas? Because the ideas have never been hers.
Just to jump forward a bit, obviously she had a long time in the political wilderness, but now One Nation back in Parliament in the upper house, and her as well. So given what you've just said, what do you make of a resurrection?
Look, it's not an increase in the support for One Nation, and I also detail that mathematically. I mean, because that's just a mathematically able to be detailed, pragmatic matter. It's very straightforward. The actual improvement in One Nation support is not there. It's not realistic, based historically. Pauline, I think, is, in many respects a bit of a waste of time in the Senate, because it's really just a fun sort of junket for Pauline and adulation and all the things that she likes. So no doubt she's enjoying it very much. But I'm yet to actually see anything realistically happen that's good for Australia, or indeed good for the people who would naturally support her.
She's obviously not glowing of you either, right?
Well, of course, I wouldn't expect Pauline to have a good word about me. I mean, look, I will say this about Pauline. I liked Pauline initially. I thought that she was, as I say, a well-meaning person, just a bit naive. But, it didn't go in the right direction. And, Pauline became, almost like a messiah complex. She believed too much about what people said to her about how important and phenomenal and fantastic and everything she was. She forgot, if she ever knew, from where she came and what it was that needed to be undertaken to achieve the things that we'd planned. It really all just became about the Pauline show.
Well, you went into state parliament and the upper house of New South Wales Parliament under the One Nation banner initially.
Yes, absolutely. Pauline Hanson's One Nation in 1999. We carried on from the federal election. It was a difficult time because we hadn't had the federal result we would have wanted, despite the fact that over 1 million people voted for One Nation. The system at that time precluded us from doing particularly well at the federal level. So off the back of that, we ran in the state election and I was elected as a member for the upper house in New South Wales.
At what stage did you say, okay, enough of One Nation, I'm going to be an independent?
Well, I didn't. I mean, this was the thing. I mean, Pauline, quite unconstitutionally, actually threw me out of the party by virtue of a press release. It was, but I knew at the time there was no point fighting it. I mean, she had no right in any sense to do it, either morally or technically, but there was no point fighting it. Had I taken her to court, I would have won that case. But then they would have just rewritten all the rules and thrown me out a second time.
Well, that obviously is a case where you didn't have a choice. Just generally, though, what do you make of people who are elected under a party banner and this is separate to the loyalty issue we talked about before, because the people have voted you into a parliament under a party banner, and it's happened with One Nation, Cory Bernardi, one of the many examples that happens from time to time, and then they change their political allegiance while they're serving their term. What do you make of that?
Look, it's not a hard and fast thing, but I'd put it this way, that if it's for the right reason that you leave a party, and in the case of Cory Bernardi, he probably has reasons that could be taken as plausible. In the case of, say, someone like Fraser Anning, and I hope that people forget his name fairly soon, I mean, the fact that he left One Nation on the day that he went into Parliament is extraordinary and wrong in every sense, but ultimately they were probably glad to have gotten rid of him because, what a piece of work, if I put it that way, he turned out to be. And I kind of saw that coming because I had met him many years ago. But generally speaking, if you're elected under the platform of the party, you should stay with the party, and there would have to be an extraordinary event that would cause you to go independent.
Now, of course, there's another whole level of people knowing David Oldfield. Post your political life, there's the radio aspect of it. I met you, I think, in the 90s. You wouldn't even remember when you were touring with Pauline. But we got to know each other better when you were at 2GB and then you were at 2UE. Did you love that?
Oh, I loved radio. Radio was my favourite form of media because it was so immediate, and I loved talk back, and I loved taking the calls and answering people's questions and hearing what they had to say, and the sort of the repartee that could take place from that, and others then calling in. And I liked the news talk format of radio because of its immediacy. Really, it was fantastic. At the same time, I've enjoyed writing, but I certainly preferred radio to television, but I've enjoyed that too.
Well, reality television nonetheless. So some would say, oh, that's rather flippant. How can you go from being a serious politician into, I'm a celebrity, get me out of here?
Well, I mean, I didn't see myself as a serious politician by the time we got to I'm a Celebrity, get me out of here. I'm not even sure. I've never really seen myself, it'll seem strange, but never really seen myself as a politician either. For me, it was a fight. And it was just a fight that was undertaken by certain means. And I think I kind of explained that in the book as well. But, look, my favourite reality show, bar none, was definitely Survivor. That was the one that I really enjoyed.
Yeah. You deal with this in the book, and it's become knowledge that you and Lisa are no longer together. So it's obviously this book's come out at a difficult time.
It was written during a very, very difficult period during the course of my marriage, and it had a lot of disruptions. And it took me a long time to get to it because it wasn't so much I had difficulty writing it or even putting the words together. It was being able to get to actually do that. It was really done in patches of horror and terror. It's been a bad time these last few years.
Yeah. And you were together, 17 years?
We met in 2000 and got married in 2001 and, of course, separated in the end of 2018.
So when we saw some of that, what some people might have thought was faux friction on shows like I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, was that real?
There's always been a lot of friction between Lisa and me, especially in the last sort of 5, 6, 7 years. Some of the stuff that you see on camera is, a bit, dramatized, if you like. It's fact which has made more drama. So it's sort of a bit that way. But I mean, obviously, neither of us wanted the other person dead, but we joked about those sorts of things. I remember at one stage she said that she didn't so much see herself as a divorcee as rather as a widow. And when I was once asked about what show would I like to do next, I said, well, maybe widower wants a wife. Mm. So we would joke about those sorts of things.
What do you think people will glean from the book?
Look, I think the book is quite fascinating, but, that's me saying that, so there's probably sort of narcissistic tendencies in that. Even when I still read it now, it reminded me of a lot of the things that I'd done that I'd almost forgotten. But I think if you've got a view of me, and you're interested in finding out a bit more, then you'll probably be absolutely shattered in the view that you currently have, because I'm not at all as I've been portrayed, but that's something that people can determine when they read the book. But you're also, and probably what is perhaps much more interesting than me, is that you're going to find out a lot about Tony Abbott, and find out a lot about politics, a lot about Pauline Hanson, a lot about how many, many things in our society work or don't work, because it's not a chronological history of David Oldfield. It's called Being David, before you judge me. And it's about what made me, and what made me is probably a lot more interesting than me.
Just on Tony Abbott, I never asked you what you think of Tony Abbott.
I like Tony Abbott. I've always liked Tony Abbott, and I was very sad to leave working for Tony Abbott, but it was something that had to happen at the time. And I always wish Tony Abbott well. We've had some rocky patches. I mean, we went about 10 or 12 years without uttering a word. But we're past that. We've been past that for quite some time, but I wish Tony well.
People would think of you often as quite harsh and obviously opinionated, which you are opinionated, but they wouldn't get to know the softer side of David Oldfield, I suppose, without reading a book or getting to meet you.
That's true. Yeah. Look, I'm largely seen as this real, very hard person, heartless, hard person. Yeah. But anyone who's had anything to do with me, where my children are concerned, where my family is concerned, with what I do with animals and my real love of animals, knows that that's not the case. But unless you've been to my home, you're probably not going to get that anywhere, because there's never been anybody really wanting to say anything nice about David Oldfield. And as I explain in the book, if you're involved in politics and you've upset people and you've beaten people and fought with people, they generally don't want to remind anybody that there might be a different side to you.
Now, your children, look, I've seen you say this on social media, and you say it in the book as well, that is your main job now, and your favourite job?
It's the most important job that I've ever had. Absolutely, without question. And I take it very, very, very seriously. And I believe that it's a parent's responsibility to make their children better than they were. I believe that's, very, very important. They should be stronger and smarter and should have everything going for them. They should learn from the mistakes of the parents. And, I'm good with that, because I've made so many mistakes. So there's, so many lessons that I can teach my children. And I, really do see that as my ultimate, most important responsibility.
Good luck with the book.
Thanks very much, Warren.
You've been listening to a conversation with David Oldfield about his book, Before You Judge Me, Being David. I'm Warren Moore. This is Open Authors for New Holland Publishers.